as well as from EnviroServe, Keith Martins. And they're going to talk about an issue here in the community, and we're going to record it for our website.
All right.
You guys are on.
All right, thank you. Good morning. My name is Mike Crook, and I'm the fire chief for the city of Santa Fe Springs. Thank you for having us here this morning. We're specifically here to talk about the Goodman-Bircher project that is 12345 Lakeland Road, which is sits right south of us here. And we want to address the issues of what is going on out there with the project and the current development, as well as I know we've had some concerns with some of the odor issues that are coming out of that property as they do the remediation. I have Keith Richards here from EnviroServe, and he's going to give a presentation. EnviroServe is a company that Goodman-Bircher has contracted with to lead the cleanup of the tanks and some of the demolition, cleanup of the soils on the property out there. So Keith, with that?
Sure. Before I get started, if you have any questions at all, just stop me, right? Although I am trained as a scientist, I despise my colleagues who come and give a presentation like this, throw all these terms around, walk away, and the people say, "What did he just say?" So please, I'm going to try to put it as in common English as I can. But even at that, if I'm confusing you or you just don't grasp the idea, just stop me, because I really want to walk away from here you having a firm understanding of what it is that we're doing out there and some of the scientific phenomena that you're actually sensing in the way of odors. Okay. The easiest, I think, way to start is to describe what we're doing and the facility itself. So I thought I'd bring in two graphics that would help with that. First one is an aerial photograph of the facility. It's 55 acres. It's bounded by Lakeland, Bloomfield, and Florence. There's a set of buildings and businesses on the west side of the property, so it's really not bound by a street. But I would guess you would say the nearest street over to the west would be Norwalk. So it gives you an idea of where it's at.
And our property is up above.
And your property is north of this facility? Right. So what you can see, if the camera's picking it up, there are some yellow outlined shapes that are on this exhibit. And those shapes represent the three buildings that are going to be going into the property. Goodman-Bircher is the developer of the property, and they'll be putting in warehouse, transdock kind of facilities on the property, the 55 acres. And they'll be very similar in look and feel to the large buildings that currently surround the property. In fact, if you're familiar with the Powerine refinery that once operated the refinery at this facility, address actually owned the property across from Bloomfield and across from Lakeland. Oh. And if you go over there, drive by there, you'll see the buildings that have been developed on those properties over the years. So this is the last portion of the property, the remnants of the old Powerine / Senco facility. Give you a little bit of medium range and recent history is that when the facilities stopped operating in 1995, two firms took it over from then till now. One was called Lakeland Processing and / Development Company, and then the next one was called Ridgeline. And what they did is both of those entities took advantage of the very large above ground storage that was on the facility and the sewer connection that was on site. Both of those were the major features, and that is why those two entities took root here. Both entities did the exact same thing. What they did is they took in water, wastewater from the surrounding community in Southern California. They processed it, stored it in these tanks, and then discharged it, the clean water, into the sanitation district. And then whatever was remaining from that treatment operation was collected. It was put in trucks and hauled out to nearby landfills.
How many containers did they actually use?
There are 22 above ground tanks. When you drive by the facility and you see those very large tanks on the side of the road, there's 22 of those.
But do they use all 22 of those for storage?
They did.
They did?
They did.
Wow.
So the smallest ones are they're on Lakeland, and I think they're about 30 feet in diameter, just to give you kind of a sense of scale. The largest ones are 120 feet in diameter. And most of the tanks here are roughly the same size, about 50 feet tall. Again, just to give you some scale. There are about a little bit over 11 million gallons of fluid in these tanks, all 22 of them, sitting there right now. And let's talk, that'll be a good segue. Oh, first of all, is there any questions about what I've gone over so far? Okay. So let's talk about the fluid, because that's ultimately going to get to the odors. And I want to make sure that everybody has a really good basis of understanding of what it is we're contending with out there. So the fluid is left over from the former wastewater treatment facilities. What we're being told is that that line of demarcation in time from 1995 forward, the refineries told us that they had emptied all of the tanks out of any petroleum products that were on site. And in fact, the State of California Department of Toxic Control issued an order that they had to rid the tanks of all petroleum products on the site. So that's a really important point, because people walk around thinking, oh my gosh, I'm smelling petroleum. Oh, it used to be a refinery. So it's kind of a natural link in your head to think, well, yeah, it stinks because it was a refinery out there and that's why it smelled. But that is a fallacy. There were no petroleum products in any of these tanks left over from the refinery. So then you ask yourself, well, what's the 11 million gallons about? And the 11 million gallons was left over from those two wastewater treatment organizations, Lakeland Processing and Ridgeline Energy. Okay, so let's talk about what's in the tanks and why are you smelling, you get these drifts every once in a while of odor. So I'm going to time out just for a moment, and I'm going to try to use an analogy that we all understand. And I'm sure most of you have either made soup or bought soup, let it sit in a container that was closed out on the counter or in your refrigerator for a very long period of time, and what ends up happening if you just let it go? The container starts to swell, right? And you burp it, and oh, you get that smell. You put the lid back on, you try to throw it away, right? The exact same thing is happening out here. The wastewater remnants that are in these tanks, that 11 million gallons that I was talking about, is the soup, the container, or the tanks, and from time to time, these tanks burp. They burp that gas that's built up in them. Now, what is that gas? Predominantly, it's hydrogen sulfide, and that's what that stinky smell is. It smells like rotten eggs. It smells like burnt, some people have said it smells like burnt eggs. Some people say it smells like burnt almonds, but that is the smell that you're smelling, and that is the source of where it's coming from. Now, let's talk about hydrogen sulfide a little bit, and what is it, and where does it come from? The exact same physical and scientific phenomena that occurs with soup in a container occurs in these tanks, is that the material that are in these tanks have bacteria in them. And that bacteria is a certain strain that we call it bug farts. So just imagine trillions and trillions of bacteria in these tanks that have been allowed to build up, and they fart hydrogen sulfide, and that's what you smell. Now, it's a perfect storm in these tanks for that bacteria. They got lots of liquid, lots of water, they've got lots to eat, because that kind of bacteria eats the kind of material that's in these tanks that's left over from the wastewater treatment operation, and you've got very temperate environment, and especially during the summer. If probably some of you have been here during the summer, you notice that it's markedly different than it is during the winter. Why? Because bacteria has a range of temperature that it loves to live in. And it starts to really love it when it gets around 70 degrees plus. So when this fluids in the tank start getting above 70 degrees, their activity just churns up. And all they do is replicate. I mean, that's what they're here for, is to replicate.
Are mosquitoes ever a factor here?
No.
Because they're enclosed.
Yes, right. And mosquitoes do not like hydrogen sulfide, by the way, so they stay clear of it. So what you end up having is, again, I'll call it the perfect storm of biological activity, where you've got those conditions in the tank allowing that bacteria to build up and thrive. And when it thrives, and when the temperatures are warm like today, as these tank contents warm up, the bugs fart more, and when they fart more, they produce more hydrogen sulfide. So then the question now comes up is, well, why do I smell it here? Why isn't it contained on the site? So anytime you have a tank that's built like this, all tanks are built with what they call PRVs. That's a pressure relief valve. And some of the tanks have more than one pressure relief valve on them. And what they're designed to do is to eliminate the tank from blowing up when it's in use. Now, it's not being used now, and it hasn't been used for, I don't know, 5 years, 6 years, something along those lines, because those facilities are now gone. Those entities are now gone. So the PRVs, those pressure relief valves that sit on top of the tanks, have a weighted vent on them. And so when the pressure builds up inside the tank, beyond a certain amount of pressure, the vent opens and it shuts right back down again. So we call it burping. It's literally like a human burps. It relieves that pressure momentarily and then flaps down again to contain what's in the tank, the gases that are in the tank. When those tanks burp, they let out hydrogen sulfide gas. And that's what you smell when the wind is blowing in this direction. Now, the wind does change direction quite a bit out here. We notice that in the morning, it tends to blow in this direction, southerly, and towards the afternoon and at night, it tends to blow in a more northern direction. So if I had to guess, never been here before, but if I had to guess, just based on where you're located compass-wise, you probably smell it more in the late afternoon or in the evening hours, right? Okay. Second thing about hydrogen sulfide gas, just its natural characteristic, is it's heavier than air. So what that means is that when one of these tanks burps and then the vent shuts back down again, that burp of hydrogen sulfide gas tends to want to hug the ground. Other gases aren't that way. Some gases are lighter than air, and so when the wind blows in a northern direction, like out here, it gets diluted quite a bit because the higher up it goes, the more dilution you get. Hydrogen sulfide doesn't work that way. It's heavier than air, tends to hug the ground, and that's why it seems like it's more concentrated when it comes in this direction, and that's why you detect it. Okay. Any questions about that part of it? All right, let's talk about hydrogen sulfide, what it is, and what you need to be concerned about.
And will it kill us?
And will it kill you? So hydrogen sulfide gas is one of the most simplest gases known to man. In fact, if you've ever heard when you're driving down the street to work or coming home and you hear the stock report and it says crude oil prices, and it refers to sweet crude and sour crude. What sour crude is crude oil that has hydrogen sulfide gas in it. It's one of the most basic gases found in the center of the earth, bar none. And so it's a natural gas. It naturally occurs with these bugs that are in the tanks, the bacteria. And to give you kind of a scale, so that you have a reference point of is it going to kill me or not, OSHA has done lots of studies. The National Institute of Health and Occupational Safety Administration has done lots of study on hydrogen sulfide gas because it's so prevalent in our environment. And they say that what we refer to as an immediately dangerous to life and health concentration is 1,000 ppm. That means that if you're exposed to 1,000 ppm of this stuff, more than likely you're just going to keel over and die. That's on one end of the scale. On the other end of the scale, you have an odor threshold. In other words, what can a human smell? And what you can detect with your nose, the average human, at 1/10 of a part per million. So that's the scale of hydrogen sulfide gas. Now let's talk about a part per million, because most people don't even understand what that means, or they've heard it, but they really don't know what that means. So again, driving home, going to work, you're sitting at a rail stop sign, rail crossing, and you see a train come by. It's got lots and lots of these tanks that are sitting on the back, right? So imagine one of those tanks filled with vodka, all the way to the brim. You take 1 drop of vermouth from a baby dropper, that's 1 part per million. Just to give you kind of a sense of scale, all right? So 1,000 ppm, it'll wipe you out. 1/10 of a part per million, you can actually smell it. OSHA says that the average worker can work 8 hours a day with no ill health effects at 10 parts per million of hydrogen sulfide. So now we're starting to give a little more detail to the scale. At 500 parts per million of hydrogen sulfide gas, your probably eyes are going to water, you're going to get nausea, you're not going to feel very well, you feel like you have the flu. Again, 500 ppm. 10 ppm, OSHA says it's fine to work in. 1/10 part per million, 100 times less, most of us can detect it. Every Tuesday, we walk around this facility, we climb up on every single tank that's out here, and we have a gas measuring device for hydrogen sulfide. The lowest our meter will go, only because that's technically what's available, is 1/2 of a part per million. So 0.5 ppm is the lowest that our meters will read. And we have never received any kind of reading as we stick our meter in the tank greater than we get all zeros every time we do a measurement in the tank. Now that doesn't mean that there's no hydrogen sulfide. I want to make sure everybody's clear on that. It just means that our meter only goes down to a 1/2 part per million. We all smell at a 1/10 of a part per million. So that if you're on 10 o'clock on a Friday night and you get a whiff of it, more than likely it's about a 1/10 of a part per million that's coming this way, brought by the wind. Okay, I said a mouthful there, so
yeah.
Any questions about that one? I'll go over it again. You want me to focus on something in particular?
No, I think we're more interested in what's next to when it's over, to get it over with.
Okay, so what happens now and in the future? So our task now is to empty these tanks with all that material that's on site. We've started with 8 and 9, which are the first two tanks here. 8 and 9, the reason we started here was because these were the two receiving tanks for the both facilities, both companies. What does that mean? What it means is those vacuum trucks that you see driving around the facility come in through the main gate, and they would offload their contents into 8 and 9. From 8 and 9, there's a bunch of pipelines above and below grade at the site that communicate with all these other tanks. So depending on what a customer was bringing in, they would pump the material to these other tanks. Here's a phenomenon that occurs in this kind of business, is that when the tanks come in, they're not just offloading liquid. They're offloading liquid, usually with some sort of sludge or solids that are suspended in that material. Sort of like sand in a way, or really fine sand. Well, when you dump liquid and sand in a tank, what naturally happens is the sand drops to the bottom. In other words, the sludge drops to the bottom because it's heavier than water. And when they pumped off the fluids into these other tanks for treatment and ultimately discharged to the sewer, those solids hung behind. And the reason we started with these two tanks is because we knew going into this, these are probably going to be the two most difficult tanks for us to manage because they have so much sludge in them. And as it's worked out, that has come to pass. We've removed about 1.5 million, so 1,500,000 gallons so far we've taken out of both of these tanks. Where does this material go? Right now it goes to Yuma, just outside of Yuma, Arizona, in a place called Welton, Arizona. There's a facility that's run by Republic, and it's called Copper Mountain Landfill. It's designed to handle this kind of material. It's literally like a Mars lunar escape out there. It's out in the middle of nowhere. It's a permitted facility in the state of Arizona. This material, as you know, is very stinky. It's going to be straight up about it. It is very stinky material. And that was the only facility that would be willing to take it. So over the last few months, we've been sending out that material to Welton, Arizona. Give you a little bit of quickie of what happens on the site. So during the daytime, we drain the material from this tank and we stick it in smaller, brand new, small 20,000 gallon tanks. We have 6 of them out there. So we have 120,000 gallons of storage capacity sitting on site that we know the tanks are, since they're new, we know they're completely intact and vapor tight. So we drain this material to those tanks, and then what we do is we fill up the tanker trucks, and starting at about 10 p.m. to about 1 a.m., those trucks leave the facility and head out to Arizona. And by the time they get to Arizona, empty their loads, and come back, it's about 1 in the afternoon. So that gives you kind of an idea of the cycle that we have out there right now.
And how long is that going to continue for?
We think that in order to empty all these tanks, we're probably looking at about somewhere between August and September, October, somewhere in that time frame. Now, the reason it's such a loose, and I give you a 3-month time frame, and you would think that, hey, this guy should be able to tell me to the date when it's going to be, is because we're not exactly sure that we're going to encounter in this tank, in as much as how much liquid and how much sludge we're going to find. Sludge is what slows us down, because you can imagine trying to pump snot. It's really difficult. It's not an easy thing to do. It takes specialized pumps to do that, and it's very slow, unfortunately. And sad to say, that's the state of the art in our business.
And these tanks are all refilling those through the same underground system?
No, what we do is when we finish tank 8 and 9, which is probably in about 2 or 3 weeks, we move all our equipment over to the other tanks, and they'll knock down these tanks. So within about 3 to 4 weeks, 8 and 9 will be gone, 15 and 50 will be gone, 36, 4, and 45, those tanks will all be gone in about that time frame.
Work your way over.
Yep, and then we're working our way this way to the west and then north. Now, the tank, there's one tank on site that has been the bane of our existence in terms of odor, and that's tank 37. That's this one right here. And this one has the most biologically active, biologically active bugs that are of all the tanks that are out here. We don't know why. It's just, maybe it's the contents in these tanks that they put in there over the years. I don't know. But what we do know is this one's the most active. And this one tends to burp the most frequently of all the other tanks. So Goodman has directed us, as soon as we finish 8 and 9, we're going to move over to 37 simultaneously while we're doing these tanks as well. And our goal is to get 37 to go away as fast as we can. Unfortunately, 37 has the most material of all the tanks that are out there. Maybe that's why. Maybe that's why it's so biologically active. I don't know. We think that's the case. It's got about a little over 2 million gallons worth of material sitting in the tank. So that's our kind of game plan. Finish 8 and 9, attack 37 while we're attacking these tanks, and then we'll pick these other ones off one by one. We have found that the others that the analytical work that we've done, collecting samples from the tank, these aren't as active as 37 and 8 and 9. So that's kind of the progression of tanks that we're going to attack as we go through this.
Okay, so ultimately, the tanks will all go.
Yes.
Will that firm that's been collecting this waste, will they still be in operation after these tanks are all gone?
Yes.
Oh, they will?
Oh, yes.
Okay, but they're not going to use these tanks anymore to store?
No. I think what he's asking, the industrial waste, the companies over there, they're gone now.
Oh, they're gone.
And they
I'm
won't be
sorry.
back.
I thought you meant the one in Welton, Arizona. No, the companies that were operating this, they're gone.
Okay.
Their history, they'll never return.
Because I know they did bring in some scrubber equipment that they were using to scrub the material that throw it into the sewer. They're no longer in
They're
business.
no longer
Great.
around.
Great.
Okay, so you don't have to worry about that. And that's a good segue to the next one. People always ask us, well, what are you doing out there? Not in terms of, I've described what we're doing, but what are you doing in terms of helping minimize and eliminate the odors that are coming from these tanks? Because we're actually handling this material. And when you handle this material, you have the potential for this material, the hydrogen gas, to come out into the atmosphere. So we've done extensive work with South Coast Air Quality Management District, and they have issued us a permit. And that permit has 77 permit conditions. I've been doing this 30 years. I've never had a permit that had 77 permit conditions on it. So it's very stringent. It's the most stringent permit I've ever had to work with. Basically, there's many things that we're limited to do out there to minimize and eliminate any hydrogen sulfide from coming off the facility. And one of them is the South Coast Air Quality Management District has directed us through the fire department to say that when we're handling this material, when we're pumping it, when we're pumping it out of the tanks, these are the tanks I was referring to that are vapor tight that we brought on site. When we pump it into the vacuum trucks, we cannot have no more than 1 ppm of hydrogen sulfide emitted to the atmosphere. So we monitor all these tanks, we monitor the trucks that we fill to make sure that that's the case, and we also have vapor control on this tank. So what is vapor control? Imagine just a very large fan that creates a suction, much like the fan in your bathroom. When you turn that thing on, it's actually creating suction out of your bathroom to try to eliminate the mist that is developed from the shower. This unit right here, this white unit, does exactly that. So imagine it as a large fan on steroids. Your bathroom fan, about 100 cubic feet per minute. That's how much air your bathroom fan moves. This unit is 22,000 CFM. So it is a monster unit out there. In our world, for vapor control, it's one of the largest units that exist in Southern California. And what this does is we have a bunch of hoses that are hooked to everything. You see these hoses right here, and those are our vapor hoses. So what we do is we have a big hose coming off the main tank that we're pulling from. We have hoses that control these. The bellies of every vacuum truck have a hose that we connect to, and they all come to this unit. It creates a vacuum, and inside this unit is just like a shower, except a really intense shower. So it has multiple shower heads in there, and those shower heads, while we take a shower, the drops are pretty big. These shower heads are designed to create really fine mist. And so it fills the entire vapor control system with this mist of a special chemical that eliminates and negates the H2S on contact. And so we run this thing every time we operate out there. Any questions about that one? Okay, and we move this around on site depending on what tank we're working on. So that if you come out to the site, you will always see this unit operating near our tanks and near the big tanks that we're actually working on at the time. Any questions about that? Now, the South Coast Air Quality Management District, in those 77 permit conditions, has mandated us, required us, to create signs so that you all and your fellow citizens around this place can register a complaint and can talk to a live person. So if you look on Florence and if you look on Bluefield and you look on Lakeland, you see these very large signs, 4x8 signs, they're black and white, and they say if you see any odor, you smell anything, here's the 1-800 number to call. Guess who's at the receiving end of the 1-800 number? It's a 24-hour service that we have, we're required to have for this, and that service then calls me, no matter what time of day or night, and every time we get somebody who registers, hey, I smell odors, we go out and investigate to find out where it's coming from. Any questions?
So the end is near.
The end is near.
Great.
Yeah. Comments, thoughts?
Wow, it really helps to have it all explained because you know, it's just we've lived through so many different scenarios of the transition of that property. It's good to hear there's a time frame to end it all.
The fire department, we're working diligently with Goodman-Bircher and with EnviroServe on minimizing the odors, but I think what you can just see with what Keith was explaining, we're going to have odors in the future. There's going to be some odors, and that's just the reality to get to this, clean up this property where hopefully Keith's timeline is correct by the end of the year, and we're rid of these problems forever out here.
Yeah, that's what we want to hear.
Again, like the 800 number, if for all the residents, if you do smell odors, like the other night we had one, it was a little bit different than hydrogen sulfide. It was a mercaptan, more of a natural gas smell. Always call 911, bring the fire department out if you have concerns. We want you to do that. We'll come out, we'll check everything out. More than likely, we'll head back over to the facility and call Keith and talk to them and try and see if we can find out the source of the odors. Like Keith said, there's an 800 number out there out front, and the AQMD is 1-800-CUT-SMOG. You can call them as well. Not going to stop the operations because we need to continue and support EnviroServe with what they're doing out there to, again, get it cleaned up. But at least alerts us, alerts them. We'll come out and work diligently with them on minimizing the odors, and then really that's the goal. So thank you, Keith, for being out here.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Questions? All right. Great. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank
We'll
you.
post it, and anybody asks any questions, we'll let them hear the whole story themselves. Thanks for coming out, guys.
You got any other question for the fire department or anything at all?
Yeah.